I was working at a hotel in Sydney when an American guest asked me where the background music was. She looked around the lobby like something was missing. I told her we don't play music in the lobby. She stared at me for a solid 5 seconds and then said, "But it's so quiet. How do people relax?" I explained that most Australians find silence comfortable. She shook her head and whispered, "This feels like a library. I can hear myself breathe." I've heard stories like this for years, not as random anecdotes, but as patterns. Most channels collect funny culture shock moments. I collect data on how humans interpret silence. If you're the kind of person who sees behavior as evidence, you'll want to stay connected here. That same week, another American couple checked in and immediately asked if something was wrong with the air conditioning. I checked their room. Everything worked fine. They said, "No, we mean, why is it so quiet? Is the building empty?" The building was full. They just weren't used to hearing nothing. One of them actually opened their door to check if other guests existed. They did. They were just being quiet. My coworker told me about an American tourist who complained that our cafe was too awkward. He said people were just sitting there, drinking coffee, not talking. He asked if Australians were mad at each other. My coworker explained that silence isn't anger here. It's normal. The guy looked confused and said, "But what are they thinking about?" She replied, "Probably their coffee." He didn't get it. I once saw an American woman at a bus stop physically uncomfortable because no one was talking. She kept looking around, smiling at strangers, trying to start conversations. No one was rude. They just nodded and went back to waiting quietly. After 2 minutes, she pulled out her phone and called someone just to have noise. She said into the phone, "I'm at a bus stop and it's so weird. No one's talking. It's like a horror movie." An American exchange student told me he thought Australians hated him during his first week. I asked why. He said, "Because no one talks during class breaks. Everyone just sits there." I explained that people were probably tired or thinking. He said, "In America, if no one's talking, something's wrong. Silence means someone's upset." I told him that here, silence just means silence. He said that was the most stressful thing he'd ever heard. Another time, an American family ate dinner at a restaurant near my place. Halfway through their meal, the dad asked the waiter if the restaurant was closing soon. The waiter said no. The dad looked around and said, "Then why is everyone so quiet?" The waiter paused and replied, "Because they're eating." The mom jumped in and said, "But it feels like a funeral." The waiter just walked away. I realized that for many Americans, silence isn't peaceful. It's uncomfortable. It's something that needs to be filled. In Australia, silence is just part of life. It's not awkward. It's not rude. It's just quiet. And apparently, that's terrifying. I was working at a library in Melbourne when an American student asked where the study music was. I didn't understand the question. She clarified, "Like the background playlist, for focus." I told her this was a library. She said, "Right, but where's the ambient noise?" I pointed at the silence. She looked genuinely distressed and said, "I can't study in complete quiet. It makes my brain too loud." She ended up playing white noise through her headphones at a volume everyone could hear. 3 people asked her to turn it down. She got frustrated and said, "I'm literally trying to create a normal study environment." One Australian student looked up and said, "The normal study environment is quiet." The American packed up and left within 10 minutes. My friend worked at a beach in Queensland. An American tourist asked him why no one was talking. My friend looked around at families, couples, and solo beachgoers just enjoying the ocean. He said, "People are relaxing." The tourist replied, "But like, in silence? That's depressing." My friend explained that many people come to the beach specifically for the quiet. The tourist said, "That's not what beaches are for. Beaches are for music and games and talking." My friend just shrugged and said, "Not this one." The same tourist tried to start a group volleyball game and got confused when only 2 people joined. He shouted, "Come on, everyone! Let's make this fun!" A local yelled back, "It's already fun, mate." The American muttered something about Australians being antisocial and walked away. I heard about an American who went to a yoga class in Perth. Afterward, she told the instructor that the class was weird because no one chatted before or after. The instructor said, "People come here to decompress." The American said, "Yeah, but decompressing is supposed to be social. You talk about your week, you bond, you make friends." The instructor replied, "Or you just stretch and leave." The American never came back. Another story came from a tram in Adelaide. An American couple got on and were visibly uncomfortable with how quiet it was. Everyone was either reading, looking out the window, or zoning out. The couple whispered loudly to each other, "Is this normal? Why is no one talking?" Someone nearby said, "Because it's 7 a.m. The couple looked offended, as if morning silence was a personal attack. One of them tried to make small talk with the person next to them. They asked, "So, do you take this tram every day?" The person nodded. Silence. The American tried again. "Must be nice, right? Regular routine?" Another nod. More silence. The American gave up and said to their partner, "I feel like I'm in a zombie movie. I worked at a bookstore in Brisbane, and an American customer asked why we didn't play music. I said it was a bookstore. She said, 'Exactly. People need something to vibe to while they browse.' I explained that most customers prefer quiet when choosing books. She said, 'That's so intense. I need music, or I'll start overthinking.' She left without buying anything and said on her way out, 'This place has bad energy.' My co-worker laughed and said, 'She's not wrong. The energy is quiet.' An American jogger once stopped during a run in a Sydney park and asked a local if something had happened. The local asked what he meant. The jogger said, "Everyone's so quiet." "Did someone die?" The local stared at him and said, "No, mate. People are just running." The jogger said, "But no one's talking. No one's playing music. It's eerie." The local replied, "It's 6 a.m. What do you want? A parade?" The jogger jogged away, clearly unsettled. I also heard about an American at a meditation retreat in Byron Bay who left after one session. She said the silence was unbearable. The instructor asked if she'd ever meditated before. She said yes, but always with guided audio or calming music. The instructor explained that this retreat focused on pure silence. She said, "I didn't know that was a thing. I thought silence was just what happens when you're alone and sad." A cafe owner in Hobart told me about an American who asked if the cafe was having technical difficulties. He said no. She pointed around and said, "Then where's the music?" He said they didn't play music. She replied, "How do people know it's a cafe and not just a room with chairs?" He said, "The coffee gives it away." She ordered a tea to go and left immediately. Another American told my friend that Australians were low energy because no one filled the silence with conversation. My friend said, "Or maybe we're just comfortable with quiet." The American said, "Comfortable? It's like everyone's in time out." My friend replied, "Yeah, and we like it." I was working at a restaurant in Sydney when an American group came in for dinner. They were loud, which was fine, but after their meal, they stayed at the table talking for 2 hours. That was also fine. What wasn't fine was when one of them complained that the restaurant was killing the vibe because other tables were too quiet. She said, "Everyone's just eating and not talking. It's bringing down the energy." Her friend agreed and said, "In the States, restaurants are social. People talk, people laugh. This feels like a cafeteria." One of the Australian diners nearby looked over and said, "Maybe because we're chewing." The Americans didn't find that funny. My friend hosted an American exchange student who got anxious during family dinners. She said she couldn't handle how quiet it was. My friend's family wasn't silent. They talked about their day, shared stories, and joked around. But between conversations, there were natural pauses. The exchange student said those pauses made her nervous. She'd fill them with random comments or questions just to avoid the quiet. My friend's mom eventually said, "You don't have to talk all the time. We're not going anywhere." The exchange student admitted she didn't know how to sit in silence with other people. She said in her family, silence meant someone was upset. My friend explained that in their family, silence just meant everyone was comfortable. The student said, "That's so foreign to me." I heard about an American at a dinner party in Melbourne who thought the hosts were mad at her. Halfway through the night, she pulled the host aside and asked if she'd done something wrong. The host was confused. The American said, "You've barely talked to me since we sat down." The host replied, "I've been eating and listening to other conversations. That's how dinner parties work." The American said, "But it feels like you're ignoring me." The host said, "I'm literally sitting next to you." Another American told me he couldn't handle how Australians process things internally. He said, "When something happens, people just stay quiet and think about it. In America, we talk it out immediately. Silence means you're bottling things up." I explained that Australians often prefer to think before speaking. He said, "That sounds exhausting. What if you forget what you were going to say?" I replied, "Then it probably wasn't that important." That single exchange sums up why I do this work. Most people just react to culture. I study what those reactions reveal, the psychology beneath them. If that kind of decoding interests you, subscribe now. This level of analysis rarely makes it into your feed twice. I was at a pub in Perth when an American tourist tried to start a conversation with a group of locals. He introduced himself, asked where they were from, and tried to keep the chat going. The locals were polite but brief. After a few minutes of short answers, the American gave up. He turned to his friend and said, "I don't think they like me." His friend said, "Or maybe they just don't want to talk." The American looked horrified and said, "Then why are they at a pub?" A local overheard and said, "To drink, mate." The American replied, "But pubs are social places." The local said, "Yeah, with people we came with." The American walked away, muttering about how Australians were cliquey. My cousin's American girlfriend visited for Christmas. During lunch, she asked if everyone was okay. My cousin asked why. She said, "Because no one's talking. It's so quiet." My aunt looked up and said, "We're eating." The girlfriend said, "I know, but in my family, we talk while we eat. Silence feels rude." My uncle replied, "Talking with your mouth full is rude." She didn't know what to say to that. Later, she told my cousin she felt like the family didn't like her because they weren't engaging with her. My cousin explained that silence wasn't rejection. She said, "I get that, but it doesn't feel that way." My cousin said, "That's because you're not used to it." I worked at a cinema in Adelaide, and an American couple complained that the audience was too quiet during the movie. I asked what they meant. They said, "No one's reacting. No one's laughing or gasping. It's like watching a movie alone." I explained that most Australians don't make noise during films. The guy said, "But that's the fun part. You're supposed to react together." I said, "People are reacting, just quietly." He said, "That's not a real reaction." An American student told me she thought her Australian classmates didn't like her because they never invited her to hang out. She said, "We talk in class, but outside of class, nothing. It's like I don't exist." I asked if she'd ever invited them out. She said no. I asked why. She said, "Because they're always so quiet." I figured they didn't want to hang out. I told her that Australians often wait to be asked. She said, "That's so backward. In America, if people like you, they reach out first." She finally invited a few classmates to coffee. They said yes. She was shocked. She told me later, "They were actually really cool. I just thought they hated me because they were quiet." I said, "Quiet doesn't mean hate. It just means quiet." My friend worked at a gym in Brisbane. An American member complained that no one talked between sets. He said, Everyone just sits there staring at their phones or the wall. It's so isolating. My friend said, "People are resting." The guy replied, "But you can rest and talk." My friend said, "Or you can just rest." The guy switched gyms a month later. I was working at an airport in Sydney when an American passenger asked if the Wi-Fi was down. I checked. It was working fine. She said, "Then why is everyone just sitting there quietly? Are they meditating?" I looked around. People were reading, using their phones, or just waiting. I said, "They're waiting for their flight." She said, "But no one's talking. It's so eerie." I replied, "It's an airport. People are tired." She said, "In American airports, people talk. There's energy. This feels like a library." She walked around trying to make eye contact with other passengers. No one engaged. She came back to the desk and said, "Is this a cultural thing?" I said yes. She said, "That's so sad." My friend worked on a train from Melbourne to Ballarat. An American tourist asked him if the train had entertainment. My friend asked what kind. The tourist said, "Like TVs or music or something. It's so quiet." My friend explained that most people on regional trains prefer quiet. The tourist said, "For 2 hours? That's insane. What do people do?" My friend said, "Sleep, read, think." The tourist replied, "That sounds like torture." The tourist ended up playing music through his phone speaker. Multiple passengers asked him to stop. He got defensive and said, "I'm just trying to make the trip less depressing." One passenger said, "The trip's fine, mate. You're the depressing part." He put his phone away, but complained the entire journey. An American on a bus in Adelaide told the driver that the route felt dystopian because no one was talking. The driver asked what he expected. The guy said, "I don't know, maybe some conversation. Some life?" The driver replied, "This is peak hour. Everyone's tired." The guy said, "That's exactly when you need energy." The driver said, "Or sleep." The guy got off 2 stops early. I heard about an American who took a road trip across Australia and posted online that Australians were terrifyingly quiet during long drives. She said, "I drove with a local for 6 hours, and we maybe talked for 20 minutes. The rest was just silence and music. I kept asking questions to fill the void, but they seemed fine just driving." An Australian replied, "Because we were. Long drives don't need constant talking." She responded, "Yes, they do. Otherwise, what's the point of bringing someone?" Another American told me he couldn't handle the silence on overnight buses. He said, "Everyone's just sitting there in the dark, not talking, not moving. It feels like a horror movie." I said, "People are sleeping." He said, "I know, but I can't sleep when it's that quiet. I need background noise." I suggested headphones. He said, "It's not the same. I need to know other people are awake." I said, "Why?" He didn't have an answer, my coworker told me, about an American couple who rented a car and got into an argument because one of them wanted to fill the silence with conversation and the other just wanted to enjoy the drive. The one who wanted silence said, "Can we just listen to the music?" The other replied, "Music isn't connection. Talking is connection." They stopped at a rest area to cool off. An Australian couple nearby overheard and said, "Mate, you don't have to talk every second. Silence is good." The American who wanted conversation said, "No, it's not. Silence is just empty space." An American blogger wrote about how Australian public transport lacks humanity because no one talks. She said, "I took trains and buses across Sydney and barely heard a conversation. People just sit there, looking out windows or at their phones. It's isolating." An Australian commented, "Or it's respectful. Not everyone wants to chat with strangers at 7 a.m. She replied, "But that's how you build community." The Australian said, "We build community by not annoying each other on the train." I worked at a carpool service in Perth. An American passenger got matched with an Australian driver. After the trip, The American left a review saying the driver was cold and unfriendly because they barely talked. The driver responded, "I said hello, asked about your day, and focused on driving. That's my job." The passenger replied, "But the silence was uncomfortable. I tried to start conversations and you gave short answers." The driver said, "Because I was driving and you were safe. That's the goal." An American exchange student told me she felt lonely during her commute because no one talked to her. I said, "People don't usually talk to strangers on public transport here." She said, "But how do you meet people?" I said, "Through work, hobbies, mutual friends." "Not the bus," she said. "That's so isolating. In the States, you can strike up a conversation anywhere." I said, "You can here too. People just don't expect it." She tried talking to someone on the train the next day. The person was polite but clearly wanted to be left alone. She told me later, "I feel like I'm bothering people just by existing." I explained that Australians value personal space, especially during commutes. She said, "But I'm not invading their space. I'm just talking." I said, "To them, that is invading their space." My friend drove an American tourist from the Gold Coast to Brisbane. The tourist asked why they weren't talking more. My friend said, "I'm concentrating on the road." The tourist said, "But it's a straight highway. You can talk and drive." My friend replied, "I can. I just don't want to." The tourist said, "Is it me? Did I say something wrong?" My friend said, "No, I just like quiet drives." The tourist said, "That's so weird." My friend said, "To you. I was working at a cafe in Sydney when an American customer sat down with a book. 10 minutes later, she came to the counter and said, 'I can't read here. It's too quiet. I keep getting distracted by the silence.' I asked where she usually read. She said, 'Coffee shops in New York. There's always music, people talking, espresso machines running. It's comforting.' I said, 'We have espresso machines running here.' She said, 'Yeah, but I can still hear myself think. That's the problem.' I realized that for many Americans, silence isn't just uncomfortable. It's something to be avoided. It's a gap that needs filling, a problem that needs solving. In Australia, and in many other places around the world, silence is normal. It's not awkward. It's not rude. It's not a sign that something's wrong. It's just silence. But for people raised in environments where noise is constant, where silence equals tension or rejection, where every moment needs a soundtrack or conversation, the absence of sound feels wrong. It feels like something's missing. And in a way, something is. Just not what they think. The American at the cafe eventually put in earbuds and played her own background noise. She smiled and said, "Much better." I didn't judge her. She was just doing what felt normal to her. But I couldn't help thinking that she was missing out on something valuable. The ability to sit with your own thoughts. The ability to be comfortable in quiet. The ability to exist without needing constant stimulation. I've heard so many stories like this over the years. Americans who think Australians are cold because they don't fill every silence. Americans who think something's wrong because a room isn't buzzing with noise. Americans who equate quiet with loneliness, when really, it's often the opposite. Silence can be connection. It can be peace. It can be respect. And trust me, these stories never stop coming. Every week, I hear about another American who couldn't handle a quiet train, a silent cafe, a peaceful dinner. And every time, I think the same thing. Maybe the fear isn't really about silence. Maybe it's about what silence forces you to confront. That's why I tell these stories. Not to criticize, but to expose the invisible software running beneath culture. If you want to keep unpacking the code behind human behavior, subscribe. I'll keep decoding it either way. But the people who do? They're the ones who see the world a little clearer each week. Your own thoughts, your own presence. The fact that you exist even when you're not making noise. Australia didn't expose some kind of flaw in Americans. It just exposed a difference. A cultural gap that's bigger than most people realize. Because silence, like so many things, isn't universal. It's learned. And for many Americans, it was never part of the lesson. I'll leave you with this. Next time you're in a quiet space and feel the urge to fill it, ask yourself why. Is the silence actually uncomfortable? Or have you just been taught that it should be?